So tonight we'll finish up the third part of the introduction to sitting meditation by talking about what one tries to do internally, it's guardedly, but in the introspective exercise of sort of getting a handle on consciousness in the mind. So we went through the physical points, the 7 points of the foundation of good sitting and posture and so forth. And then last week we went through the breathing component. And again, at the end, I stressed the breathing works naturally by itself when the whole body is very natural and relaxed. And it's an effortless kind of breathing, similar to the breathing you do when you're resting or even at sleep. It just takes care of itself. In a similar way, although with a lot of complicated history to it, this is what these texts tell us is the nature of the mind, or the nature of a consciousness. That although sometimes Chan or Dhyana or Zen is translated as stilling the thoughts or calming the mind, and sometimes we use shamatha, another expression. These are somewhat misleading, and that's where the Sixth Patriarch's text is going to be very helpful with this, because what the text is telling us is that the mind or consciousness is in and of itself calm, still, quiet, alert, but nowhere attached or clinging. That is described as the nature. And so you don't really calm it or still it as so much not allow it to leave or depart from that natural stillness and purity. So the language is a little misleading, and it's not just a matter of semantics, because in the actual practice of doing this, if you think you have to stop the mind, quiet the mind, either gently or forcibly, or that you're trying to stop thoughts, you will end up getting frustrated. And so you have to almost think outside the box a little bit, in the sense that, oh, if the text is right, if the patriarchs are right here, then the natural state of my mind, the natural state of consciousness is to be pure and still, and to see things as they really are. And seeing things as they really are, you recognize there's not one thing that you can get or attach to or cling to. And so the mind then is just let be in this state. So the meditation exercise is only necessary as a counteractive technique to get back to that ground that is natural, but has been, over time and through habit, so disturbed and so stirred up and so caught up with this grasping, seeking busyness that it's even to the point almost forgotten that it has this ability. And so sometimes faith, if you use the word faith in this, it's a conviction or an insight or a moment of clarity within which you realize, I've really strayed far from this natural home. They sometimes called the wind and light of your original home or your original mind. And so the faith is a kind of conviction. Sometimes they call it a sort of inspired clarity. It's another language that's used to talk about seeing that you have that ability, seeing that you have that nature, even if for a moment. And it's a basis of faith. It's a basis of conviction that it's there. The next step is then faith is engaged in a determination, a resolve to reclaim that space, to restore that space. And so it's very active. This is not a passive kind of I believe in, but rather it's a conviction based on a moment of clarity or moments of clarity, and then a resolve to say, I am going to, I believe I can and I believe I will, go back to that state. And consequently, as you do this, one of the third things that arises from this is a joy from doing the first two, from seeing it, and then from engaging in the determination. And you get a joy because you know you're on the heart and throb of what it means to be a person. You're reclaiming the deepest part of your nature. And so there's a joy that starts to naturally arise. And it's not a joy that comes and goes and says, oh, today it was a good sit and I feel good, and yesterday was a bad sit and I feel bad. No, it's just coming from doing the work and knowing that you're engaged in something real and genuine is releasing a kind of joy that doesn't come from any place else other than intrinsically doing what is natural. So I want to stress this in the text. So when it says we're calming our mind, stilling our thoughts, we really aren't actually exerting that much effort. What we are more aiming at, and what the text is aiming at, is to simply not let it wander or stray from its natural stillness and purity. And it's a different approach. So in the technique, as you're sitting, you borrow, they say, poison to fight poison. So since this habit energy stirred up is constantly moving and generating and going wild, sometimes compared to the wind coming up with storms, or compared to a turbulent river flowing, eddies and cycles and currents and waves just going all over the place. And you think that water could never be calm when you look at a river like that. And sometimes it's even compared, Qingliang Gosher, a famous commentator, Tang Dynasty monk, compared it to fire. And when you observe fire, you just see this constant activity of burning. You can't tell, well, where does one flame begin and the next one end off? It's just constantly going in this fashion, and it doesn't seem to have anything in control or determine it, no causation and no endpoint until ashes, and then, another fire goes. And so the mind and its wanderings are compared to this turbulent stream or the wind blowing. And he gets even more specific. He says, one breeze doesn't know the next. One breeze doesn't know. One wave doesn't know the other wave. It's being pushed along, doesn't know it's being pushed along, and it seems to be following, but it's not really following one in front. And no one can tell where this will go. And this is consciousness unplugged, so to speak, consciousness gone wild. And so the goal in the meditation practice, what we're doing is just taking some technique here of trying to begin to watch that ground of consciousness of mind, then beginning to see all that frenetic activity. So the first stages of meditation, my teacher would describe, are somewhat like a madness. But what he meant by the madness was not institutional, clinical madness, but you are, for a moment now with the exercise, actually seeing your mind at work when you sit still like this. It doesn't mean that it's become more active when you're sitting still or more wild. You just never have paused to observe that field. And in fact, you are being pulled along by it continuously without even realizing that this is the yoke to your nose, the ring in the bone, this is being pulled. So when you actually begin the practice, the first sensation you have is of overwhelming, chaotic, frenzy, frenetic activity going on inside. And you say, well, I must be practicing wrong, or this monastery is no good, or the teachers and their Dharma methods are really deficient. And really, this is an efficacious response, because you are seeing your mind in its wild, uncultivated, unrestrained state where you've let it go. Now, some people have this to various degrees. And the degree to which you experience this is the degree to which you've let it become overgrown with weeds and wind and so forth. The more you've let it be overgrown, the more when you sit, it seems to be wild. It seems to be almost immense, like you're taking on Goliath, and you're this puny little Pushin or something, and I can't ever conquer this. If you haven't let your mind go to, oh, it's so badly, it's not so overwhelming. And you actually, early on, start to have moments where you actually can sense this natural calm and clarity, and then it ebbs and flows and whatnot. But don't get nervous and think this is some kind of a competitive test. Some people's minds are better than others. That's not the case. The mind is universally the same in all beings, and all beings have the potential for this awakening. How we've let that go over a period of not just days and months and years, but lifetimes, is the degree to which we've let that ground either become or stay in its natural state, relatively unpolluted, if you will, or undeveloped, if you want to use another metaphor, or to the degree to which we have mined it, extracted it, driven it, and keep overusing it and abusing it. And so that's the feedback. You're listening then to the echoes, the movement that's happened. There's a famous poem by Hui Neng, begins with a metaphor. When he realizes this, he uses the metaphor of going home. And he says, he must be at 60 at something this age, and he's lived a pretty, interesting wild life, and suddenly he realizes that he's completely out of control, and he's just being pulled along by his habits and impulses. And he says, he gets a resolve, I'm going home. That's the first line of the poem. I'm going home, I'm returning home, meaning going back to this ground. My fields and gardens are choked with weeds, is his second line, describing how the neglect over time has allowed this. But he says, why should I not return, is his third line, meaning that's the determination, okay? I see it, I'm going to go back. Oh my gosh, I really let this thing go to seed. Okay, so you roll up your sleeves and go to work. This is very much in the spirit of someone like Emerson, the American transcendental philosopher, who talked about all we have to work with is this. This is the ground that we have to work with. There's no other ground. We don't get anything by grabbing, seeking outside, cheating, taking shortcuts. He says the ground that's given you to till, this natural ground, is all you have to work with. And nobody knows what they can do, or will they, until they try. So this is from his essay on self-reliance. So the idea is, okay, that's my ground. Don't judge it. Don't get in saying, oh, I'm just so sinful and negligent and I've lived such a wild lives, or whatever you want to do here. And then you sink into a kind of despair, and maybe even a little bit, it's self-mortification. But it basically ends up you paralyze yourself from taking action because you say it's hopeless. So you don't go there. You just objectively, like a doctor, do the diagnostics and look. And so the first stages of this meditation, when you do sit, you're gathering in your body, you're relaxing your breathing, and then with these various mental exercises, and there's a number that you can do, techniques, for watching, observing the mind, and then not letting it distray or move off that place. Those techniques then expose it, and you see exactly what's there, and then you know kind of what you have to do. And after a while, you'll start to recognize patterns, recurring patterns of thoughts, feelings, emotions, reactions, and so forth. You'll have memories. Things will stir up that you thought you had forgotten, because in this ground is stored quite a bit. This is a repository for all your thoughts, feelings, karma that you've done over such a long time. This is a huge gigabyte, terabyte, megaterabyte, blah, blah, blah storage thing, okay? And it doesn't have any capacity limit, right? So it's there, and you could go on filling this thing. Well, in order to let it return to its home, that stuff has to play itself out. And it plays itself out naturally. This is what's interesting. It doesn't want to stay. It evaporates just like dew, unless you keep adding to it. So if you don't react to it and you don't repress it, it will of itself exhaust itself. Just like a wave comes in from the ocean and it hits the shore, where does it go? It rolls across the land and stirs up the dirt, right? No, it goes, it's gone. But then the next wave comes and it too goes out. Well, eventually, if you don't keep stirring up the waters in this way, those waves will play themselves out, and it will be returning to its natural stillness again. So it's not like you quell the waves or still the water. You simply refrain from continuing to stir it up, and they exhaust themselves. So that's where patience can make sense, if the theory is correct. Now, if the theory says, no, you've got to really squash those waves, you've got to get a cover on them and put the lid on, then you're going to take a whole different approach to your meditation. But if this theory is correct, you can be patient, realizing that eventually if I don't rekindle, if I don't stir up, if I don't blow on the fire and add more fuel, eventually this thing will subside and go back to its natural equanimity. So this is really important to understand. Otherwise, you can end up going really wrong in your meditation. You'll either go into despair because it's not happening fast enough and it seems like there's no stopping of this, or you'll sink into a kind of forceful, uptight, repressive meditation, right? Damn it, I'm going to get it today, you know. And you do this and you won't get it, because that is like adding airline fuel to the fire. That kind of energy is like, wow, you want to build a fire? Add force to it. Add will to it. And so what you have to do, the patience required here is the patience to let it be without repressing and without reacting. Don't try to push it down, and don't try to engage and follow it. Just let it pass, and it will go. Okay, so.
Can I ask one question?
Mm-hmm.
You use ground in two ways. One is kind of the fundamental awareness that's inherent, and then the second one is kind of like the latent substrate of your past karma that needs to.
Well, actually, the ground is sort of the mind or the consciousness or the nature. Okay. Now, the karma are the seeds that have been planted in that ground, and bija. So you plant the seeds in there, and then if you're really good, you don't just let the seeds go. You nurture them. Yeah. Your anger, your lust, your cravings, your fears. You feed them. You give them water. You give them sunlight, and you think, my babies, my little bit. Oh, they're sprouting. And pretty soon they're just entangled. So this is why it's called, not planting further seeds, and letting the other seeds play themselves out in the natural way, because things will reach that cycle unless you restore it, and don't fertilize it. Yeah, so I'm using metaphors here, but all of you know what I'm talking about. And this is called clinging or attaching. And what's meant, psychologically, you're clinging and attaching to these states. That's giving them energy. And then you're nurturing and fertilizing them by dwelling on them, playing them out, fantasizing about them, revisiting them the next day, dreaming about them at night, right? You couldn't give a better diet to falseness than that. You just feed it, right? And it gets anything you feed will get very healthy. Bacteria, fungus. We have these tea molds we drink called jun. It's a kind of fungus that, I know it sounds bad. Yeah, what is it called? Kombucha. We didn't buy it at the store. We used to make it. We had the mold, and you put it on this tea, and then you put it near a radiator in the monastery. We put it in the radiator, and this thing would grow out of like some sci-fi movie. It was like, whoa, the Night of the Dead. And this mold and sometimes it get that thick and drop these tentacles down. So the stuff you get in the store, if they sold it like this, you wouldn't buy it. They take all that stuff out and they sell it to you. This stuff is the real stuff. And then and it's got is it bacteria? But you blow on it, it gives up a dust like mold.
It must be bacteria.
Yeah, bacteria and mold. Right, so anyhow, but you don't take that in. You then scoop out a little bit of that and drink it every day. It's supposed to be a tonic. Okay, the point I'm making here is that some people would take this on like this was their one and only child. So although they had left home to cultivate the way and given up things, they did not give up their jun thing. And so sometimes you'd go behind a radiator, behind a refrigerator where the motor was, and you'd see this bottle. And it was filled, and this mold was that thick on the top of the tentacles going down, and they would go after that. And if you fed it and you took care of it and warmed it in a certain way, added a little sugar, this thing would grow and grow and grow and never stop. So it's kind of a metaphor. So the ground is that potential, but what you plant on there becomes in, the seeds or the karmic, and then turns into, and sometimes it becomes seemingly self-sustaining, but it will exhaust itself eventually if it's not reinforced and fed. So that means it returns. In the same way, if you stop polluting through factories, just stop the stuff going into the air, the natural air will return eventually to its state. But if you keep generating the factories and the CO2 and the nuclear waste and stuff like this, it just keeps going. But left alone, and same with eventually with water or any of the natural elements, they'll start to settle and return. Does that help? Or Okay. So you can use a technique of, and they say you try to bring the 10,000 myriad fluctuations of your mind and nature that's just vibrating like this. It's like 3,000 channels, and you are simultaneously just clicking your thing, and it's just going all the time. You try to bring it and hold your attention to one thing. By trying to bring your attention and hold it to one thing, you reduce your focus and concentration and hold it to that space, and then you can, by not direct observation, but an observation of fields, you can see the movements of. You just keep coming back. Why you keep coming back is you're not going out to any of those specifically. You're just sitting there. The language says you sit with a calm and dispassionate mind and with equanimity observe the rise and fall of conditioned dharmas. Conditioned dharmas means all this activity that's going on, because they do rise and fall by themselves. And so while you hold your mind to singleness, they rise and fall. You see them out of sort of your peripheral vision, if I can use a metaphor. But you're simply passively observing them as they rise and fall by themselves and not feeding them, not engaging them. But that requires that you kind of hold the mind, bring the attention back, because the habit energy we've generated is to let it go after these things. And generally we go after the good ones, the pleasant ones, the most enjoyable fantasies or movements that connect with the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, or so forth. Or we try to push away and avoid the ones we don't like. And this constant action of grasping and pushing away, of craving and aversion, is that dynamic activity that with singleness you're bringing to a momentary pause. You're not allowing either of those to happen. The field is still generating all that, but it's no place that you're attending or there's no place you're abiding or dwelling on it. And that in itself is a little taste of the naturalness of the mind that is naturally unattached. Now, isn't the state that you're, because the state requires no meditation, ultimately. But the meditation is a necessary medicine to try to get back to it. So, what you can do is you can use an internal recitation. You can use, some people use Ami Tofo, or they go Namo Ami Tofo, or Namo Amitabha, as a invocation of a Buddha, or Namo Guan Yin Pusa, or Guan Yin Pusa. You can use that. Or you can use Om Mani Padme Hum. There's no end to techniques you can use. All of them essentially are called using poison to fight poison, using the expedient to bring the mind back. And I must say to you, I don't think there's any that are better than the others. I'm sorry. I mean, you might think that there's a quality grade to here. There's, mediocre, and then low, entry level. And then, and then there's the high refined, pure. No, it's all the same. It's all the same. All it's doing is holding the mind. The magic is not in what you're reciting, but the efficaciousness comes from the attitude with which you use it. So this thing is turned by your intentionality, your attention to it, and not the magic intrinsic to this. So don't think that these Dharma doors, as they're called, these methods of practice, some are magical and some are ordinary, or if you pay a little extra money, you'll get that really works. This is all just hype, okay? They're efficacious because the mind that uses them makes them efficacious. Your effort is the thing that turns coal into diamond. Nothing else. And so the effort is picking this one up and staying with it and using it and not dropping it. And that's why they say it's like getting a drill to make fire. You stay with it. You stay with it until you actually have sparks, not thinking, oh, there's better wood or, or there's something. You just stay with it until finally it works. And then you start to realize, oh, that's what the direct teaching means. You do it by yourself, for yourself. It's not done to you. It's not like you sit here and all of a sudden there's some Buddha up on the balcony, let's say, who just sort of descend and said, oh, I feel so sorry. You've been doing this every Friday. You're so sincere. And then poof, Tinkerbell dust comes down and you go, oh, I'm awakened. No, it doesn't work that way. It's actually a transformation coming from your own effort. Just as you eat and you get full, you sleep and you get rest, you do this and you get results. You don't do this, there's no results. Okay? So it's, I'm sorry if that's a little disappointing, but, you know, as one of the masters said, what in life doesn't work like that? Why would cultivation not work like that too? So that's part of the meaning of direct. Now, when you do this technique, it'll seem sometimes silly to you, it'll seem childlike, it'll seem naive, it'll seem boring. All of that is just the mind doing its thing, okay? So the mind that is habituated to this hyperactivity, I would say almost like addicted, if you wanted to use that language, resists coming off the high. And the high here really is the low, because the high of stimulation here is the actual cloud dust that's clouding the vision of seeing things really clearly. But because we're so used to it, when it starts to actually calm down, we think, nothing's happening. This is boring. And that's only telling you that your habituated reaction to this is really strong. And that's why one of the reasons it's hard to break. Even though we know intrinsically this is not a healthy state of mind, we become so accustomed to that, we think down is up and up is down. Right? And that's what we think is normal. And if you hang out with people whose minds are like this, it's like, sure, we're all normal. You do a little quiet and what's wrong with you? Try it at a party. Just sort of pull back and be quiet for a while. Someone's going to invariably come up, are you unhappy? What's wrong? Is there something wrong? So people often when they meditate get that reaction from other people. But you'll get it internally. So your little mad mind inside is going, something's wrong, something's not normal. What are you doing? This is not good. Stay busy, stay active. You know, take on a new project, buy this, sell that. You know, and you go, dream about this, fantasize about that. Look to the future, remember the past. You know? And it just goes and goes and goes, and you say, no, I'm going to really sit and be quiet. Well, that's stupid. You know, the internal dialogue then goes, that's stupid. Why don't you do something productive? You're wasting your life. You only have 60 years and days. You haven't even found Mr. Perfect or Miss Perfect yet, and you're sitting here. You're not going to find him that way, blah, blah, blah. And it just go on and on and on. And do you know how silly you look? And sure, they say Buddhas come from this. Have you ever met a Buddha? No, you haven't met a Buddha. You think you could become a Buddha? What a joke. And that's how the internal dialogue, it really gets intense. There's nothing it won't conjure up. And if you get really determined, then it'd say, you know, you could die like this. It'll go into that. No, it's really quite interesting. When you meditate, you will activate this little child, and it's quite a brat. And so just be willing to take it on. Now, talking a bit about more that this technique happens so that when you're doing it, you're trying to bring your mind back to that focus and not let the mind wander. But it will start to wander. And so when it starts to wander, you gently return it. Now, whether you're doing Om Mani Padme Om, or let's say Namo Guan Shi Yin, Namo Guan, you do Namo Guan Shi Yin Pusa, Namo pizza after lecture. Oops. Oh, come back. Namo Guan Shi Yin Pusa, Namo Guan Shi. My engagement ring. I wonder what, you know, and you just go, and it goes on and on and on. You think, oh, I should be able to do this. I could recite it 10 times without breaking my concentration. And then you go, and pretty soon you find out, wow, I'm at the basement bargain sale here of my consciousness. What happened to my recitation? And it's like, hello, lost and found, we have missing concentration here. You lose it, you don't even know you lose it. And you go, oh my gosh, and then you come back. But that's the first technique. You keep coming back. Not violently, not angrily, not dejectedly, but you just persistently keep coming back until that habit starts to get stronger and stronger. If it wanders, you catch it, and all you do is just bring your attention back here with your recitation, back to what I described last week. Now, if these techniques don't work, and you can't seem to hold it, and it's really wild, there's a technique that Dharma Master Juri calls suchness or true suchness meditation. And that's where you actually use a stronger dose of contemplation, or what we might call insight, or theory, to counteract this. And you say, okay, I'm trying to hold you, you're wandering off, and you're really vehement about wandering off. And my techniques aren't working. Let's look at what you're wandering off to. Let's look at this nature of this state. And that's the true suchness contemplation is actually taken from the Vajra Sutra, which we'll refer to tonight, which was the line that the Sixth Patriarch heard for the first time and produced his initial awakening. Let your mind be unattached, clinging to nothing, is from the Vajra Sutra. So the Vajra Sutra has a very important line. It says, all phenomena, all conditioned dharmas, meaning everything that we project through the six senses and the consciousness and whatnot, we call the reality of the real thing, including the internal workings of minds, feelings, emotions. All of these are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, like dewdrop and flashes of lightning. Contemplate them thus. And this contemplation that's given to Subhuti in the text by the Buddha is meant to help him break through this habitual movement. He's saying, okay, you can't seem to do this. Really look at this analytically and say, what is it that you're after that you can get a handle on and grasp and say, this is mine, I have it forever. This thought, this feeling, this material thing, whatever. You realize that all these things are in a flux of constant impermanence. There's nothing that's not in this movement of the constant arising of conditions and so forth and the shifting, pratitya samyutpada. And so when you see this analytically, you can then, and that's why it's called the Vajra Sutra, because it's a diamond cutter. It cuts through very quickly the illusory, unexamined thoughts that produce this grasping and attaching. When you actually ask, what is it you grasp and attach to, you get? You realize there isn't a darn thing. Internally, externally, there's nothing that you can... It's like Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, reflection. No person can put their foot in the same river twice. And what he was saying was the river being a flowing body, when you put it in once and take it out, when you put it in the next time, it's different. Because that part that you put in has already flowed on. Probably the Buddha would say, not only can you not put your foot in the same river twice, you can't put the same foot in twice. In other words, you are also a river. No, you're a river. You are made up of fluids and energies and molecules and atoms and things that are moving around constantly as we're sitting here. No matter how still you sit, if you could turn up the volume of the internal movements of your body, it would be a deafening sound. As the blood flows, as cells die and cells are born, you think, okay, so when a baby's born, and when a cell dies, so this is going on. Thousands of cells are being born and die as we sit here. Okay? Your breathing is constantly going in and out and in and out. Put the microphones at the right level inside you, say, where is there some place that's solid and unmoving and still? I am a mass of moving particles, only held together by certain causes and conditions. Sorry. So you eat enough food, you keep enough clothes on, you stay within the right temperature range, it'll kind of gel. Kind of gels, right? You up that temperature, change something, and it kind of dissolves. Not only can it melt and get flabby and whatnot, it can actually dissolve and turn into nothingness again. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. You have this non-duality between matter and energy. So you think, I'm so-and-so, and I've got a history, and here's my photos, and here's my future, and I've got all these plans. You're just a bubble of jelly little things moving around, thousands and thousands of them, kind of held together by causes and conditions, many of which you don't control, like tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis and things like this, diseases that will just separate the four elements and so forth. Wow, it's pretty fragile. So what you're doing with the meditation, when you're contemplating thus, you realize, okay, if this is the nature of things, why am I so frantically trying to grab and hold on and attach and cling to something? This is truly futile. And that futility is the beginning of the insight of awakening to realize that in the natural state there is nothing to grasp. But that nothing to grasp is actually a kind of profound freedom and joy, because you're now free of the cycle of dukkha, craving, grasping, and so forth. So this is a lot to pack into one thing, but it's important to get the theory here. So sometimes people use counting breaths. How many of you have used the counting breath technique? That's one way to use the meditation. You sit in meditation and you count the breaths. But it's the same thing as going in. You count to 3 and you lose it and you forgot where you were and you have to start over again. And even if you get up to 10 and go backwards, 10, 9, 8 back, you might be able to do one cycle, you get really good, and then it's gone again. But you can use this as a mind centering technique for counting breath. And you count it, you can actually begin a kind of process of observing the breath as it comes in and out. Any of you use this technique? Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. It's a very, very simple and easy technique, and you can try it. There's another level to that you can think about if you want to use the true suchness meditation on top of that. So who is this that's breathing? You could do that one. Well, I'm breathing. Really? And if you stop breathing, is still an I there? Huh? Wait a minute. I didn't know. I was just counting my breath, counting money. No, really think about it. Who's breathing? And you think, well, is breathing also a conditioned dharma? Oh, well, you say, here goes the breath in, and there goes the breath out. Here's relationship in, relationship out. House in, house out. Body in, body out. All conditioned dharmas, dreams, illusion. Well, past breath cannot be got at. You exhale it, where's it gone? Oh, I'd like that one. I'd like to keep it. Well, then you hold it. Well, hold your breath and see what happens. Right? And the future breath hasn't yet come because you still got the present one. And the present breath, where is it dwelling or stopping? No place. You see what I mean? If you just use a simple suchness meditation on top of the breath, you realize just as breath, future breath can't be got at, past breath can't be held, and present breath is nowhere that you can nail down, so too with everything. So even the breath meditation can be used in a true suchness way. Okay. That's a lot, but it's worthwhile going over, I think, because it's important to get the theory down while we're doing this. Any questions on this? Yes?
In the beginning, you said that rather than thinking of it in terms of stealing the mind or doing things to steal the mind, it's more about not letting it, to restore it back to its original state.
Not letting it wander and stray and go away. Because it gets stirred up. The texts say, because you don't recognize this, you get stirred up. We are naturally pure and still, but our thoughts disturb it, and our desires entice it away. And then we start, and the further we go, the further from home we go, and the worse it gets. So it's reversing that activity by not letting it wander and stray. And it's important to understand this because there's nothing to get in meditation. That's where you think, well, if I calm it and still it, then I get something. But actually the method here is explaining it is naturally okay. It's naturally whole and complete. And you'll see these lines when the Sixth Patriarch talks about his awakening. How unexpected. It's already whole and complete. How could I have forgotten it? So the activity or meditation is not to be anxious to get something, but simply let the process of not wandering take care of itself, and then it arrives because it's always been there. It's a little counterintuitive.
I think I understand that. And the technique they're doing, isn't that part of the doing?
The technique is only part of the doing because you have no way to just let it be. You've let it go so long that you no longer have any method to let it be. It's like a child that you've spoiled. You've spoiled the child really badly. And now you come home and say, I wish you would be good from now on. Well, good luck. The child is used to getting its way, having its temper tantrum, eating what it wants to do, and talking back and so on. It's not going to change without some technique or training. You have to intervene and redirect those habits and change those habits for it to come back. So yes, it's a doing, but it's a doing that ends at some point because the natural then is restored. But the doing that is going out never ends. They say it's like a bottomless pit. You'll never fill it because you're seeking, wanting, and everything you seek and want ultimately turns out to be worthless or frustrating or empty or constantly creating more hunger and want, of which it can never be filled because it's like an itch that can't be scratched. So that doing is a doing that leads to further confusion and habitual. This is a doing that leads to a stopping, an undoing. And that's why sometimes it's called wu-wei, without doing, non-doing. Yes?
The part where you mentioned our the recognition that we're unattached to anything. That's a beautiful thought. But what I'm trying to understand is, how does that relate to our daily responsibilities, or are we bringing ourselves back to that thought in order to...
You shirk all your responsibilities. No, okay, right. And then you're free. No, actually, you're more entangled. For example, if you go ahead and create a family with kids, and then suddenly you say, I should have the mind that's attached to nothing. Wow, I'm free, bye-bye. Unfortunately, it won't work, because you created now a field that needs to be attended to. So just as you have to clean up the field of your mind, you have to change and fulfill your responsibilities before freedom can come about. Now, some responsibilities can easily be changed or adapted. You change your college major, no big deal. Nobody's saying, have you thought about this very seriously, the implications of switching from chemistry to biology? And wow, get real. But once you create children, that's not like changing majors. And so you have to think, that's why they talk about certain intentional actions have heavier responsibilities and take more time and more conscientiousness to disengage from. And the way you disengage is by fulfilling those responsibilities, but then carefully not creating new ones. So the exercise of getting free from the Buddhist sense is to always be aware of what you're doing and the consequences of what you're doing, and looking at that cause and effect that's happening moment to moment, thought to thought, word to word, relationship, job to job, and you gradually try to craft something almost in an artistic way that has the least amount of negative consequences, the least amount of harm to it, and the maximum amount of independence and freedom. Now, that doesn't mean isolation. It might mean the ability to really help people with an unattached mind, because now you can really do help without pushing in an agenda of wanting rewards or blah, blah, blah. So you have to understand this liberated mind that is being talked about here is not some kind of stillness in a vacuum. It's actually the ability to act unencumbered. So he says later, it's everywhere engaged and nowhere attached. Whoa, that's interesting. Because now you can engage without attaching. If you engage and attach, you mess up the results.
So it's our ability to recognize the unnecessary excess in our life.
That's, one level of it. Okay. And the simplification is not necessarily you do less, but you do less that's grasping and attaching and confused. And if you really get to that state, you can do a lot more, ironically. So, and he'll go into this and say, be careful, this is not about a dull stillness. This is not about pulling away from society and going into some kind of hermetically sealed space. This is about being actively engaged at every level that you meet, responding to things as they are, nimbly, freely, and then being able to do what is exactly appropriate and right there. And it's acting appropriately that is the freedom here, not acting, but acting appropriately. It's a very different... Yeah, so that's why going through the whole text, this, if you enough, either by will or by just causes and conditions, and you don't evaporate, you'll see he goes into this in quite some detail, because even at his time, there's a great deal of misunderstanding about what non-attachment means. And he'll be meeting students that have been sitting unmoving for 30 years. And he says, you're no different than a piece of wood. What are you doing? You've wasted 30 years. You're sitting here on a piece of wood. He says, when you die, you'll be even more still, won't you? Whoa. And so he keeps pushing and challenging this notion that you can break your attachments. Now you attach to your stillness. Now you attach to your sitting. Now you attach to nothing bothers me. Well, that's as much as attaching to a Mercedes or fame. It's the same effect on the consciousness, only it seems more holy. So that's why, who is it, Emily Dickinson, much madness is divinest sense, but sometimes much divinest sense is madness. You go the other way around. So you have to get into this, that this is a state of consciousness and not a uniform kind of behavior, or even you could say, oh, somebody's unattached because they're not doing anything. The Sixth Patriarchs might say that is not only not unattachment, it's a higher form of attachment, because now you're attaching to your ego. Moreover, your natural compassion, which flows from the unattached, liberated mind, because it's natural, that is natural too. So your compassion has to be squelched. It's a natural quality we have. Think about it. You don't develop your compassion. It's whole and complete and flowing over. You repress it. You shrink down your consciousness to me and mine, and therefore you compress that compassion. You don't have to develop because naturally it relates and sees and interconnects with all that is. So if you start thinking all the virtues, wisdom, compassion, kindness, joy, these all flow from the nature, and they're completely whole and natural, and they spread everywhere unless we shrink it down. So what he's talking about here is the process wherein which we shrink our consciousness, we collapse our consciousness down to these narrow and narrow little caves. Me, mine, my future, my family, my clan, my race, whatever it is. And we think, yeah, now we got, but what we've done is we've taken this incredible, wonderful tool of the mind and shriveled it down to this little dwarf. And it's not meant to do that. He says this mind is meant for all of that greatness. So there's no limit to what you could do with an unattached, unbound, liberated mind in terms of engagement, in terms of compassion, in terms of activity. And yet, at the same time, you would feel completely free, you'd feel energy boundless, and you wouldn't feel any kind of sense of restriction or regret, and so on and so forth. That's what's being talked about here. So it's a really profound text, I would say, about liberation more than anything else. Yeah, good questions.
So I'm having a little trouble determining what is appropriate actions and how you determine what is appropriate from what is inappropriate. And maybe related to that, I'm also wondering about what the role, I haven't heard you talk about meaning in what you were saying.
About what?
Meaning, meaningful things in your life, things that are meaningful to you. Is that a blade that you can use to determine what is appropriate from what is inappropriate in terms of engagement in life? Or is that just another kind of thing that you can get attached to and maybe is inappropriate?
These are really good questions. I'll partially answer it if I can, but what I'll say is when we get to this thing where he talks about no thought, Wu Nian, no thought, people then interpret this as you have a blank mind. You've stopped your thinking. What he means by no thought is no interfering thought between seeing things as they really are and therefore seeing what is naturally appropriate. The appropriateness is a natural quality of an unattached, unbound, liberated mind. And in fact, having to second think, well, is it or is it not, is already leaving that natural state that would see it immediately. As soon as you project an agenda or something in between it, you lose that first clear seeing of what's appropriate. So appropriateness is actually a natural function of the liberated mind. It's not something you have to mull over or do a cost-benefit analysis on. It's absolutely, he would say, self-evident. And the self-evident becomes distant when we shrink that consciousness back, let it fully expand and reach out and read everything that's there to be read. So that's why they say it is effortless, it's boundless, and it's just free-flowing and very nimble and very quick. And it's not quick in a hypersense, it's quick because there's nothing inhibiting its natural functioning, which is to always act in accord with what's appropriate as things are. And so he again brings it back and saying, don't try to think what's appropriate, try to think what's interrupting your ability to recognize what's appropriate at all times. And in some ways, as we get smarter, we get dumber in this way. So the more we calculate and scheme, the more that ability, that natural functioning then gets impeded, gets corralled in. And even if it's right, we find ways to not do it with that clever mind. So he's talking about something that's rather artless in the sense that it's not done through scheming and conscious manipulation of thought or whatnot. It is a natural flowing of seeing things as they really are and letting yourself be not driven by negative emotions and so on and so forth. Once those are gone, this thing functions by itself freely. That's why all his energy in here is about taking away what's inhibiting rather than trying to get something that's going to enhance. There's no enhancement necessary. It's already whole and complete. It's very counterintuitive in a sense, and yet at the same time, it makes a great deal of sense. Makes a great deal of sense. But when we get to this, we'll go into it because there's a lot on this. Wow, we're out of time. And we didn't get to the text. Can we do it next week? Can you save it? Okay. Anyway, so those of you who are interested, what we were going to do tonight was on page 7, where it all began, which I guess is appropriate. But let me just read you this one line from the text, and we'll go back and start it over again. It's where he actually starts to talk, and he says, good and wise friends, Bodhi, in other words, awakening, is just the purity of your own nature. It's just the essential purity of your own nature, that's Bodhi. Attend only to this, and you will straightaway achieve Buddhahood. So this line, to me, that's the text. We could stop tonight. If you could understand that he's saying that awakening, Bodhi, the full functioning of your marvelous potential, is your own natural state. And if you simply attend to that, nurturing that, not letting it depart and whatnot, you will straightaway achieve Buddhahood. Whoa. Very powerful. So this sets the tone of what he's going to do. So many of his teachings are, how come you forgot it? How come you walked away from it? How come you don't know? Why are you asking me? And all these seem to be, oh, this is that Chan stuff. It's not Chan stuff. It's like a good physician saying, why did you take that poison? And so what he's doing is he's putting you back onto the ground. The only ground from which you get Bodhi and liberation is your own mind and consciousness right now as it's sitting here in this room. Not like you imagine to be, in the next life when you're a Buddha, or not as you regret it was. But right now in this present state of mind, if you can examine what's going on internally and all your thoughts, feelings, emotions, you'll see exactly where your awakening is and isn't. And you'll see exactly what's inhibiting it or enhancing it. It's pretty powerful. Pretty powerful stuff. Okay. More questions?
Yes.
Quick one, I hope?
Yes, it is. I want to know at what point can this Bodhi get lost? Is it from a newborn realizing their consciousness and having that purity and just being?
Technically, again, what he would say is it doesn't get lost. It can't get lost. We can lose sight of it, but it doesn't come or go. And this is very interesting. Even in the most depths of your depravity, or whatever you want to say it, in the depths of your being, depression, depravity, lost it, it is still whole and complete. Although covered over by the weeds and so forth. But it doesn't increase and it doesn't decrease. It doesn't come and doesn't go. That's, in terms of optimism, that is really a powerful, but it's also realism. It's not like it's magical. Oh, it's still there. Where? Well, you have to stop. You have to stop what you're doing to catch it again, right? So this is really both very profound, very simple, and I guess depending on somewhat elusive in the actual doing of it. And yet, once you get a flavor for this, you are really empowered, I must say. If you understand this, you understand the techniques here, then you will really know how to do it. And you'll never by anything else be attracted that's going to change you except through the change that comes from what you've done on that ground. So in that way, it's very empowering. And it's quite self-reliant because no one's going to save you in this technique. I'm having a heck of a time just rescuing myself from drowning. Do not look for me to pull you out. And he even says the same thing there. He says, you should do this yourself. Now, if you can't do it yourself and you're really drowning, find a teacher to throw you a lifeline. But as soon as you learn how to swim again, drop the line and keep going. Don't expect the teacher to drag you along. So his thing is, and he's not being what you call harsh love. He's being very realistic. He said, it isn't going to come except through doing it yourself. And you wouldn't be who you are if you believed it did. And I'd be cheating you if I said it came from outside. So I'm giving you the straight thing. At the same time, it's accessible to anybody who sets their mind to doing this. So there's a kind of pragmatism here, and a kind of, I wouldn't say harshness, but I'm trying to find what the word is, a candor, a directness that's both refreshing and a little bit, a little bit unsettling. So anyhow, we'll go into later, but next week we'll start on I promise, since we finished the meditation stuff, By the way, on the meditation stuff, if you have the techniques down, these principles, you can continue to practice on your own without needing any more instruction. Now, if states arise, this text is one of the texts you can use to discern those states. And that's what the texts are for. But the basic practice now is you just start doing this. You sit and do this practice every day, and it will start to work on its own. And there's nothing special you need to buy or special classes you need to come back to. But just continually to apply discernment to that technique using these methods, and you're self-sustaining. Okay? So if you have questions, maybe by next week they'll dissolve, as all conditioned dharmas. Questions dissolve too. Sometimes you say, I have people say that, and finally say, I forgot what I was going to ask. Wu-chang, impermanence, just another wave. But if you do remember them, bring them back next week and we'll try to look at them. I don't necessarily have answers, but I think if we look at it honestly, we could probably find ways to ask the questions that might lead to answers. So we do it kind of collectively and using the text. We might be able to make some headway here. Okay, any announcements? I know you have good questions, and you don't ask me these questions. There's some of you are asking me questions. I applaud you for your courage, really. And those of you who have the best questions and are clinging to them, I scold you for being selfish, because lots of times your questions are the questions everybody else has. And if you don't ask them, they don't come up. So ask questions. Now, don't ask, like, I don't have a question. Let's see if I can come up with a question. Don't do that. That's looking for something to do when there's nothing to do. But don't take a question that's really, and sit on it, because there's no reason to do that. Life is short, so ask. If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. That doesn't mean there's not an answer. It just means I don't have a clue. Yes? Do I think what?
An emotional investment or passion? Is that a hindrance to growth?
What do you mean by emotional investment? I like that term. Is that like you put? Is there an APR on that? I mean, what's the return rate on the emotional investment? and what return rate would it be worthwhile investing in? What I'm sort of playing with this a little bit. Passion depends on how you define it. There can be excitement. There can be energy. There can be enthusiasm. Is that passion? I guess. Was he passionate? Yes. He left everything. Was that passion? I guess so. But some passion's constructive and some's destructive. And knowing the difference between them is the key to working this, right? And so again, it's discernment. There's no absolute here. You have to be reading yourself at every moment to see, how is this playing out through my consciousness? Or is it, here's my list of right or wrong. It's not that simple. This is something that draws all your sensibilities fully functioning with complexity and vulnerability and sometimes uncertainty, but at least honesty to say, hey, when I do this, I feel that. Now, I want to pretend I don't feel that, and I want to pretend that that passion was a good one, but I know that vibe. I felt that before. And when I do this, I know it's going to help lead to this and so on and so forth. And you start to build up a knowledge base on your own self-understanding and your own reading of things. And that's really what the Buddha is talking about when he says you must know for yourself. You must know for yourself, and you can know for yourself. Actually, you can know even better for yourself than anybody else can. So you have a better answer to that question than I could give you. Yeah. Okay. See what I did? I opened Pandora's questions.
Just now you mentioned that, like, in the Vajrayana Sutra and these lines where, the bowl and then the power of lightning and contemplate as such. May I clarify what does this word contemplate mean?
Contemplate means to
In a practical sense.
To see things as they really are. To look at life squarely. Don't cover it over with romanticism. Don't cover it over with nihilism. Okay? Look, one of the meditations you do at the beginning, you can do as a contemplative exercise, what doesn't change? What lasts forever? And you begin an analytical investigation. Okay? You go, Well, my husband, my wife, my parents, no, they change, they come and go. Generations. Where can you find something that is unchanging, eternal, fixed? And you begin, that's what it means to contemplate thus. It means to look at it really openly, critically. It doesn't mean to go into a mystical state. It means to look at it squarely and say, if I look at things squarely in this world, I don't see anything that's permanent and lasting. And not only that, but the one who's looking at it, I also know. Because you weren't always wearing glasses. So one time your eyes were looking at things differently. It means your eyes themselves are subject to impermanence. My teeth are subject, my body, my awareness. So there's no place where you start that investigation when you contemplate them. Thus means look at things squarely. Don't get negative about it. Just be realistic. Because so much of our problems come from not being realistic. We actually live in fantasy projections and call that reality. And all the Buddha's saying, look, if you're going to get really clear, the very least you have to do is look at things clearly, squarely. Stop the fantasizing, romanticizing, stop the despair and nihilism. Just open your eyes and take at things and look at it squarely. And sometimes it takes events in our lives to do this. Passing of someone that we were close to brings it home again. This is true. This is thus. This will happen to me. All conditioned things go through this. I have let myself become a little drunken regarding I don't look at things squarely. It doesn't mean you're negative, but you're at least dealing with things as they really are. That's the beginning. If you don't get to there, there's no hope to cultivate this into any deeper thing because you're filtering everything through. And the filter itself is just a construct that's impermanent, and that will collapse. Or it'll be crushed. Yeah, good question. Okay, now you got questions going. Now we're going to stop. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, you did have an announcement.
Yeah, I want to just two things real quick. One is, there's actually purses in the hallway here. I think brought it over right now so people know
Purses?
Purses. People's purses.
Oh.
That's in the hallway. Not the magic with your purses in the hallway.
Yeah, don't be unattached to those things.
Because those can actually go and people get afflicted. Other than that, we have I think tomorrow we'll actually have a senior monk coming, Elder Master Hui, or also considered Elder Master Tan Dao. He's going to be visiting tomorrow. If you want to listen to him give a talk, he'll be speaking after lunch. So if people would like to.
So people come for lunch or come after lunch?
People come for lunch, and he'll be speaking briefly after lunch.
He's in his 80s. He's from mainland China. He is one of the younger disciples of Shu Yun. So Master Shu Yun, who was one of the teachers of my teacher, had a number of disciples. That's why he has the name Xuan Hui. Xuan like Xuan Hua, the first name. So as you're in lineages, you get the first names are the same. So our lineage is all Hangs, and these are all Xuan. So he's Xuan Hui, my teacher is Xuan Hua, and he's one of the last living disciples of Shu Yun. So.
What time is the talk?
It's not. I don't think it's fixed. It's probably just after lunch.
Is he only staying tomorrow?
He's just coming down for tomorrow down here. Yeah.
So like during lunch?
After lunch. Probably like how we have a talk after the Dharma talk after lunch. That's the kind of idea.
Yeah, having been in, I'm not being derogatory here, but there is a habit in Asia, throughout Asia, of napping after lunch. Even when I was teaching in the schools, the kids, their heads would just go down on the desk, and I'd go. And it was hopeless. They were gone. So if he's talking after lunch, you may miss that one line that would cause you to have an awakening experience because you were asleep. So don't eat so much.
We're Asia?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just joking. Yeah, okay.
Okay, transference.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If you will hear and see, our hands and hearts can find in giving unity. May their minds awake to brave
respect to the Venerable Master.